The dog returned alone. Mud caked its paws, matted its chest, and stained the white of its collar a ruddy brown. It scratched at the cabin door with frantic urgency, whining in that pitch that was part desperation, part confusion. Inside, the house was still. No scent of brewing coffee. No voice humming the same two bars from that old Springsteen song. No man behind the stove flipping eggs, no leash on the hook. Just the dog, panting, waiting, staring at the door like something still lived behind it. It had been gone just under 3 hours, but when neighbors finally came knocking, the creature was pacing in circles. The man who'd walked it every morning, always at 6:35 a.m. sharp, rain or snow, had vanished. Just gone. They found the man's phone on the counter, his wallet too, a half-drunk glass of orange juice on the table, sweating in the morning sun. Nothing taken, nothing packed, no car missing. Just a leash, now empty. The front door wasn't locked, but it was shut. The coffee machine had sputtered off automatically. His name was never released in the early coverage, just local man disappears while walking dog. But his name was Peter Huxley, 43, a high school history teacher, a divorced father with shared custody, the kind of man who remembered birthdays, who called his mother every Sunday, who still sent handwritten thank you notes for the smallest gestures. The kind of man no one expects to vanish. The police were called within 2 hours. The dog was examined for traces of blood, for burrs, for anything that might lead searchers to a path. The vet noted 3 small cuts on its legs, likely from underbrush or jagged rock. The pads on its feet were bruised, overworked. Someone had suggested coyotes or a mountain lion, but there were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no torn clothing, no shredded leash, just silence. The woods behind Peter's cabin stretched for miles. Thick, uneven terrain leading into the remote eastern edge of the state park. The path he always took was well known, but there were spurs, offshoots, deer trails. Peter had grown up in the area. He knew those woods better than most. Search teams came, dogs, drones, volunteers in high-vis jackets combing every trail for a week straight. Nothing. No body, no trace. The dog couldn't speak, and the forest kept its secrets. Eventually, the coverage faded. The community tried to move on, though a quiet ache settled over it. Every time someone went out for a walk, they looked over their shoulder, just in case. Peter's daughter, Lily, didn't stop searching. She was 22, a graduate student in environmental science. After the initial wave of search parties left, she kept going on weekends, on holidays, even taking incompletes in some of her classes. Her professors understood. Some had known Peter. She marked a map, over and over, trying to trace distances based on time, speed, topography. The dog had come back in just under 3 hours. Lily calculated the radius. She calculated it again. A 10-mile radius. That was a lot of land, a lot of wilderness. She walked all of it, over and over again, but the forest gave her nothing. Then, just shy of a year later, something happened. It started with a man named Emery Connors, a bow hunter, middle-aged, soft-spoken, and methodical. He hunted alone, always had. That October, he'd been testing out a new drone he'd bought to scope hunting terrain before the start of the season. The drone had a high-resolution camera and thermal imaging as a gift to himself after last year's kill came up dry. He launched it from a bluff that overlooked a steep ravine. The kind of place that swallowed noise and light, where the undergrowth was thick and chaotic. Most people didn't hike down there. Too treacherous, too easy to slip. The drone drifted in low, humming quietly, scanning over the shadowed drop. At first, Emery didn't see anything unusual. But when he reviewed the footage back at his truck, he paused at a strange shape caught in the tangle of rock and underbrush. A flash of red. It might have been a leaf or a bit of flag trail tape, but it looked like fabric. Torn, fluttering against a broken branch, snagged like a warning flag. He zoomed in. The red was bright. Too bright for this time of year. It had rained 2 nights before. Anything natural would have darkened. This glowed like something new, something wrong. Emery reported it that afternoon, not because he feared what it was, but because he couldn't explain it, and because, somewhere deep in his bones, he knew what he'd seen wasn't meant to be there. Rangers responded the next morning with a drone of their own. They found the fabric. Then they found more. A shoe, a torn jacket, a broken watch with a cracked face, and a shallow depression in the earth behind the outcrop, too shallow to be a grave, too neat to be a random collapse. They cordoned off the area. Lily was contacted the same day. She drove all night to get there. The site was hard to reach on foot. The ravine had no real path, just slick earth and jagged roots. But Lily made it down with the rangers, her boots sliding in mud, her hands clutching branches to keep balance. She saw the jacket first. She remembered it, a Christmas gift from 3 years ago. Red shell, waterproof, embroidered with her father's initials. There was no doubt now. Her father had died in that ravine, but how he'd ended up there, how he'd ended up buried under leaves and moss and silence, that part didn't make sense. He knew those woods. He wouldn't have wandered off trail. He wouldn't have fallen. And someone had placed rocks over him, carefully, intentionally, as if hiding him. That was when they reopened the case. The medical examiner's report confirmed what Lily already knew but hadn't allowed herself to believe. The body was her father's. Dental records made it official. The remains were largely skeletal, but there was no evidence of blunt force trauma. No broken bones, no signs of a fall. He hadn't been mauled. He hadn't suffered a stroke or heart attack. His boots were missing, and so were his socks. That detail haunted her. He never hiked barefoot, never took off his boots while outdoors. The scene was eerily clean, too clean, as if someone had scrubbed it of any sign of a struggle. The jacket had 2 small tears, one on the shoulder, one near the hem. Not from a fall, the fabric wasn't abraded, just pierced, neat, linear, the kind of damage you might expect from a knife. But there was no blood, no bone nicks, no blade. The ME marked the cause of death as undetermined, but there was an addendum. A note that said, in clinical language, that the placement of the body and the intentional coverage with debris suggested human involvement, not an accident, not nature, not human. It changed everything. Police reclassified the case from missing person to suspicious death. Investigators returned to the area with fresh eyes, new technology. They canvassed the ravine, set up motion-activated trail cameras, interviewed hunters and hikers. They found nothing new, but Lily did, not in the woods at home, in her father's study. He kept journals, not daily diaries, not confessional outpourings, but meticulous observations, weather, trail conditions, book quotes, his thoughts on lectures, students, ideas for hikes. Notes about the dog's behavior. She read every one. Most were as ordinary as she remembered, until the final notebook, the one with the green cover, dated a week before he vanished. There, on the 3rd page, is something strange. A line, written sideways in the margin. Don't go past the fence. No context, no explanation. The entry it bordered was about a new trail he was planning to explore, a shortcut he'd been told about by someone at the hardware store. The name wasn't written, just guy with the truck. Lily tried to remember if her father had ever mentioned anyone new, a friend, a neighbor, but nothing came to mind. She took the journal to the sheriff. They made a copy. A detective was assigned to her family's case. Finally, formally, after a year of waiting. His name was Eli Baird, mid-40s, reserved, sharp-eyed. He had worked 2 other cold cases, both involving missing persons found dead under unclear circumstances. Lily trusted him instantly, not because of his badge, but because he didn't promise too much. Didn't posture, just listened, took notes, and kept showing up. Eli started from scratch, interviewed everyone again, Peter's co-workers, students, friends, the ex-wife. All said the same thing. He had no enemies. He wasn't involved in anything risky. He didn't use drugs, didn't gamble. He wasn't dating anyone. He was predictable, and that was part of the puzzle. People like Peter, don't just vanish. They don't die alone in ravines without a trace unless someone wants it that way. Lily brought up the dog again, a shepherd mix named Rusty, Peter's constant companion. That dog had made it home the morning he disappeared, cut up, exhausted, but alive. Eli requested the original GPS logs from the early search efforts. Most of those records had been archived, but a ranger named Hannah still had her notes. She remembered the dog, remembered how it led them in circles at first, pulling hard in a direction the team hadn't prioritized because it veered too far east, toward private land. Land that bordered the park but wasn't under state jurisdiction. The map showed it clearly, an old boundary line, fenced decades ago but now mostly forgotten. Eli pulled property records. The land had changed hands twice in 15 years. It was currently owned by a man named Gerald Mathis. Retired. Lived alone. No social media. No family listed. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. Kept to himself. Fixed fences. Cut wood. Paid his taxes on time. His cabin was about 4 miles from the ravine where Peter was found. Eli drove out there unannounced. Asked about hunting rights, trails, if Gerald had seen anything unusual last fall. Gerald said no. Claimed he'd been in Arizona visiting his sister that week. He had receipts. Gas, groceries, a dated motel stub. It checked out. But something about him didn't sit right. Too calm. Too rehearsed. Back in town, Eli ran his name through every available system. Nothing criminal. But when he requested archived reports from a neighboring county, something pinged. A missing persons report from 8 years prior. A hiker, young, male, vanished in the same general area. His dog came back too. Nothing was ever found. Gerald Mathis had never been questioned in that case. He hadn't lived on the property yet, but he had inherited it 6 months later from a distant uncle. An uncle who had died suddenly. A stroke. Alone in that same cabin. Unremarkable. Unquestioned. Eli requested aerial drone footage from the past 3 years in that region. Forest Service, Fire Watch, even amateur hobbyists. There wasn't much. The terrain was steep and uneventful. But then he found something. A video posted by a local YouTuber, a hobbyist explorer, who cataloged abandoned places. In one frame, barely visible, a figure stands in the tree line, watching from a distance. The video was filmed less than a mile from where Peter's jacket was recovered. The date? 2 weeks before he disappeared. Lily watched the video on repeat, zoomed, adjusted, stabilized. It was impossible to tell if it was Peter, but the figure held something in his left hand. A leash? A walking stick? Or something else entirely? By now, nearly a year and a half had passed since Peter's disappearance, but the silence around his death had only grown louder. The questions, heavier. That's when the drone hunter returned. Emery Connors, the man who had found the red jacket, had continued flying his drone in the area. Something about the whole thing had unsettled him. He didn't want to get involved, not really, but he also couldn't stop thinking about it. So when the snow melted in spring, he flew again. Same path, same ravine, deeper this time. And he found something else. Another shallow depression, covered in moss, marked, faintly, with disturbed ground. He reported it the same day. And this time, what they found under the moss wasn't a body. It was a bag, a duffel, weather-worn, but sealed. And inside that bag, something that changed everything. The duffel bag was forest green, the nylon sun-bleached and fraying at the seams. The zipper was rusted, and it took 2 officers in latex gloves to pry it open without tearing the fabric. What they found inside wasn't just odd, it was deeply disturbing. A bundle of photographs, dozens, all printed, all old-fashioned, glossy, 4x6 prints. Most were of nature creeks, trees, sun-drenched trails, but some weren't. Some showed people, not smiling, not posed, candid, sometimes unaware, often taken at a distance. Always men, always alone, hiking, resting on rocks, drinking from canteens, faces partially hidden by hats or shadows. And there, among them, a photo Lily recognized instantly. Her father, sitting on a fallen log, tying his boot. Rusty, the dog, half out of frame. Peter hadn't noticed the picture being taken. He was focused on the knot in his laces. The timestamp on the back confirmed it, 2 days before he vanished. It was evidence, maybe the first real evidence they had. Not just that someone had followed him, but that this wasn't a one-time event. Whoever had taken these photos had done it many times, dozens. Over years, Eli processed the contents carefully. The photos were grouped into folders, rubber-banded together. Some were labeled with years: 2014, 2016, 2019. One was unmarked. It contained only 4 photos, all of the same man. A bearded hiker with a green backpack, laughing in a creek. They didn't recognize him, but facial recognition software did. His name was Shane Carter. 27. Missing since 2017. Case still open. Last seen hiking the same park system. No leads, no body. Lily sat in the sheriff's office as the evidence was logged, trying to breathe evenly. Eli looked at her across the table. "It's a pattern," he said. "This isn't just your father." She nodded. Didn't trust her voice. The duffel also contained something else. A small notepad, spiral-bound. The first few pages were faded, water-damaged. But underneath the smudges, there were lists, names, dates. Some of them had check marks beside them. Some had X's. One had a star. Peter's name wasn't on the list, but Shane Carter's was. Next to a check mark, Lily stared at the paper. These weren't just photos, it was a ledger. Eli got a warrant the same day. They returned to Gerald Mathis's property with a search team. The cabin was clean, too clean. Bleach lingered faintly beneath the smell of wood smoke. The freezer was empty, the shelves bare. But the basement, that was different. They found a darkroom. An actual darkroom. Chemicals, trays, a drying line strung across the ceiling. And in the tray, still soaking in solution, a photo, unfinished, but unmistakable. A man crouched near a tree, urinating. The shot was angled, voyeuristic, the face blurred by motion, but the dog beside him, clear, rusty. Lily looked away. She couldn't handle more. In a locked drawer, they found more folders, more photos, not prints negatives, thousands of them, unlabeled, untouched, some dating back decades. Gerald was arrested that night. He didn't resist, didn't ask why, just nodded once when the handcuffs clicked. In the interrogation room, he spoke very little. Declined a lawyer at first, then asked for one after Eli showed him the duffel bag. Lily watched the footage from a separate room. Gerald was calm, almost bored. When asked about Peter, he said only this: "I watched him walk that trail every Sunday. He was always early, always alone, except the dog." Eli asked him why. Gerald shrugged. "They come into the woods thinking they're safe, thinking nature is beautiful, but it doesn't love them back." He wouldn't confess, not outright, but it was enough. Combined with the photos, the notepad, the prints, and the proximity to the ravine, it was enough to charge him. Officially. The news broke 2 days later. Local at first, then national. Serial trail stalker arrested in Mountain Town. Headlines used words like obsession, predator, and hidden for years. They didn't know half of it. Lily returned to her father's house to pack away the journals. She didn't want them stored in evidence. They were his voice, the only real connection she had left. As she boxed the last one, something slipped from between the pages. A photo, an old one, faded. She turned it over. Her father and a man, standing beside an old Jeep, laughing. Arms around each other. The man wasn't her mother. Wasn't anyone she recognized. On the back, Kurt trail marker, mile 5. October 92. She didn't know what it meant, but it looked like happiness. She stared at that photo for a long time before tucking it into her jacket pocket. A piece of him she hadn't known, a life she hadn't seen. It didn't change anything, but it made everything feel heavier, more real. 2 weeks later, they found more remains, buried deep on the far edge of Gerald's property, near an old well. The bones were old, at least 10 years, maybe 15. 2 sets. Young men, the coroner guessed. No identification. But one had a hiking medallion tucked in the remains of his jeans. A trail token, unique to a specific season. Eli traced it to a volunteer program from 2008. One of the missing men had signed it. First name only. Lily didn't need the names. She knew what it meant. Her father wasn't Gerald's first victim. He was one of many. Maybe not the last. She sat with that thought for days. It clung to her like the fog on the trail that morning. Damp, insistent, everywhere. Eventually, she returned to the woods. Not to the ravine, not yet, but to the start of the trail, where the leaves still fell in spirals and the wind whispered through the branches like breath. She stood where Peter had stood, leash in hand, and let Rusty sniff the air. The dog whined softly, then tugged the leash toward the east, the path that had once led toward the fence, toward what they now knew had been danger all along. She didn't follow. Instead, she knelt beside him, whispered a thank you, and turned back toward the trailhead. The wind shifted. The leaves rustled like memories. She didn't cry. Not yet. The trial date hadn't even been set, and yet the courthouse lawn filled daily with news vans. Reporters from 3 states huddled behind ropes, asking questions no one had the strength to answer. Eli walked past them with his eyes forward, jacket collar raised against the wind, heart clenched tight. He didn't trust the media with this story. It wasn't theirs to tell. Not yet. Not like this. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter, but no less intense. Gerald Mathis had entered a plea not guilty. His lawyer, a private defense attorney from the city, filed for a psychological evaluation. Claimed Gerald showed signs of delusional behavior, that his solitude had bred fantasy, not intent. The prosecution didn't argue. They had time, and a mountain of evidence, but no body. That remained the problem. Peter Stillman was still legally missing, not confirmed dead. His remains hadn't been found, only implications, circumstantial evidence, and Gerald's chilling photos. Eli knew how juries worked. Without a body, everything was doubtable. The motive, the sequence, even the death itself. Reasonable doubt grew in the absence of bones. Lily knew this too. She sat in the sheriff's office. A copy of the search map spread across the desk. Red markers dotted every zone they'd cleared. Blue ones marked where the drone had flown. Yellow where the dogs had signaled but found nothing. "There's still gaps," she said, pointing to a patch near the far northeast ridge. The terrain was too steep. The drone's battery died before reaching that section. Eli rubbed his eyes. "We didn't have the tech last year. Even with the new team, it's too unstable. Landslides, crevices, that whole face is ready to collapse. But it hasn't yet." He looked at her. "You want to go by yourself?" "I want closure." She didn't say what they both feared, that the jury might not convict, that Gerald might walk, that without her father's remains, this nightmare might never end. Eli made the call that afternoon. The new drone arrived the next day. High range, heat sensing, with terrain mapping capabilities used in wilderness rescues. Lily watched as the operator launched it from the overlook, the machine buzzing like a giant wasp before it vanished over the ridgeline. On the screen, the canyon unfolded beneath them. Granite cliffs, deadfall trees, jagged edges softened by moss and time. The drone skimmed the surface, scanning with radar and heat. Nothing. Then a flicker. "Go back," the operator said. He rewound the footage frame by frame. A small dip in the terrain, a shadow where there shouldn't have been one. The drone pivoted, hovered, scanned again. There, tucked between 2 boulders, was a piece of fabric, blue-gray, weathered, flattened. Lily's breath caught. They sent in a ground team the next morning. It took ropes, winches, and 2 volunteers from the mountain rescue team to reach the site. The boulders were massive, settled into the hillside like broken teeth. Between them, wedged tight, was what had once been a body. The remains were partial time, and scavengers had done their work, but there was enough. A molar, a belt buckle, a watch, and the collar from a dog leash, frayed, metal tag still readable. Rusty, if found, call. Lily didn't cry. Not then. She just exhaled. A deep, final breath that left her trembling. The coroner confirmed the remains within 48 hours. Dental match. Partial DNA. Fractures consistent with a fall, but also post-mortem damage likely from movement in the rocks. He hadn't suffered. Or so they said. Lily sat in the courtroom that winter, snow drifting outside the windows like ash, and watched Gerald Mathis enter in an orange jumpsuit. He looked smaller somehow, older. His eyes darted briefly toward her, then away. The prosecutor spoke for over an hour, laying out the photos, the duffel bag, the notebook, the prints, the prior missing persons. The defense objected often, lack of direct evidence. No video, no eyewitness. The judge overruled most of it, but the jury listened with closed expressions, hard to read. When they showed the photo of Peter on the log, Lily looked away. Gerald never took the stand. He never spoke another word in public. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty on all counts. Lily sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her face unreadable. When the sentence was read life without parole, she didn't move, not until the courtroom emptied. Then she stood and walked out into the cold, where snow still fell in quiet curtains, muffling the world. She didn't know what to feel. Closure was supposed to be a relief. Instead, it felt like collapse. Her father was gone. Gerald was imprisoned. The story was over. But something inside her refused to settle. Not grief, not vengeance, something else. She returned to his journals, to the stacks in her apartment, now boxed and labeled by year. She began to reread them, slowly, carefully, looking not for answers, but for him, his voice, his thoughts, his life before the trail ended. One night, 3 months after the trial, she found an entry she didn't remember reading. It was dated 2 weeks before he vanished. Short, just a paragraph. Saw the man again. Same jacket, same camera. Near the creek this time. He didn't wave, just watched. Something about him unsettles me. But Rusty didn't growl. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Still making a note of it here, just in case. Lily stared at the words. Her father had noticed, had sensed something wrong, but he'd dismissed it, trusted the quiet, the routine, the normalcy of walking alone in a place he loved. That was the cruelty of it. Gerald hadn't just preyed on people. He'd preyed on trust. That was what stuck with her. Not the horror, not the trial, not even the grave in the woods. It was that moment of dismissal, that small, human decision to ignore a gut feeling, to give a stranger the benefit of the doubt. Lily closed the journal gently and made a decision. The snow had melted by spring, uncovering layers of the forest that had remained hidden for months. Dead branches, lost gloves, candy wrappers flattened by time. Nature, careless and slow to clean. Lily returned to the trail once the ground softened. Not the spot where they'd found her father. That place was cordoned off now, marked by a discreet plaque the sheriff insisted on placing. But to the other trails, the ones they used to walk, the ones still humming with birdsong and wind. She brought Rusty's collar with her. It felt like something she needed to do. Closure wasn't a courtroom verdict. It wasn't a burial plot. It was this, retracing steps with no goal but remembrance. She paused by a stream where her father used to stop to refill his canteen. The same mossy stones still marked the bend, worn smooth by decades of water and feet. She knelt and placed the collar there. The tag caught the light. A bird called from the pines. And she stood up and walked on. That same week, Eli received a package. No return address. Just his name and department, scrawled in capital letters across the top. Inside, a manila folder. One sheet of paper. A photograph printed on glossy 4x6 stock. The paper read, "You missed one." The photo showed a young man standing by a water tank, shirtless, smiling at the camera. Dated 2 years prior. Location tag: Oswego County, 2 towns over. Eli stared at it for a long time. He didn't recognize the man, but something in the posture, the camera angle, the odd intimacy of it, it felt familiar. Too familiar. He called Lily, asked if she was sitting down. The case wasn't over. Gerald Mathis, it turned out, had traveled more than anyone suspected. Receipts surfaced, toll records, gas station purchases. He'd been active for over a decade. Quiet towns, isolated parks, state forests without much oversight. The FBI reopened their dormant file. Gerald was labeled a prolific, opportunistic predator with an unusually high degree of control and concealment. They estimated at least 8 additional victims. Maybe more. Most wouldn't be found. Most didn't have daughters like Lily. She joined the task force in an unofficial role: research, victim support, timeline reconstruction. She pored over maps, compared missing persons reports, and contacted families who had stopped hoping long ago. One mother sobbed when Lily called her. Her son had vanished 3 years ago after a solo trip to Idaho. They'd assumed a hiking accident, but there were no remains. Just a parked car, some gear left behind, and a memory frozen in time. Lily flew out there, walked the trail herself. She found nothing, but she left a wildflower by the last trail marker anyway. She made it a ritual. Every place a victim was believed to have disappeared, she left something small: a stone, a pressed flower, a name written on a smooth river rock. Some part of her refused to let them be stories without endings. The media dubbed her the daughter of the vanished. It sounded dramatic. She hated it. This wasn't a legend. This was her life. And every year on the anniversary, she returned to the hill where her father was last seen, where he had walked Rusty, unaware of what waited in the woods. She brought no candles, no signs, no cameras. Just a chair, a thermos, and her father's old journal. One year, she found someone else sitting there. An older woman, hair gray, wearing hiking boots and a long canvas coat. She turned as Lily approached. "You're her," she said. "The one who found the killer." Lily nodded cautiously. "I didn't find him. He found us." The woman patted the seat beside her. "My nephew disappeared in 2016. Colorado. We thought he drowned. They said he probably slipped in the current. But after your story came out, I'm not so sure." Lily sat down and listened. That was what she did now. Not search, not chase. Listen. There was power in that. In being the one who made space for grief, who didn't flinch at the details, who could hold the silence without trying to fill it. Years passed. Gerald Mathis remained in prison, but no one remembered him kindly. He had no visitors, no letters, no interviews. When he died quietly in his cell during the winter of his 74th year, the news barely made a headline. He'd tried once to contact Lily. A letter, handwritten. She'd never opened it. Burned it in the fireplace the same night it arrived. Some things didn't deserve answers, but others did. One day, while organizing a box of evidence long since archived, Eli found something they'd missed: a cassette tape, buried under paperwork in Gerald's confiscated items. It had no label, just a timestamp: 2009. He brought it to Lily. They sat in silence, listening together. It was audio only: the hiss of wind, distant birdsong, then voices. 2 men, one asking questions, the other answering. Awkward laughter. A snap of a branch. A question that lingered: "Is this the trail?" Followed by a pause too long. Then the second voice again. Calm. Steady. "Just trust me." The tape ended shortly after. Lily closed her eyes. She didn't know who the voices belonged to, but she knew that tone, the quiet confidence, the manipulation hidden in gentleness, the illusion of safety. Gerald's weapon had never been violence. It had been trust. And over time, Lily learned to carry that lesson carefully, not in bitterness, but with caution. She still hiked, still spoke at schools and park rangers' trainings, still looked over her shoulder sometimes, not because she was afraid, but because she knew what most people didn't. Monsters didn't wear masks. They wore smiles. She never remarried, never felt the need. Her life was full. Letters from survivors, visits from grieving families, hikes with old friends who understood when she needed silence. A dog named Finley, who bore no resemblance to Rusty but followed her just the same. And every so often, a stranger would stop her. "You're the one who found him, right?" She never said yes, just nodded slightly, and kept walking. The first snowfall of the season came late that year. Light, quiet, almost apologetic, the way it dusted the treetops and turned the forest trail into a soft white corridor. Lily returned to the hill again, the same way she always did. A thermos of tea in one hand, a photograph in her pocket. Not of her father, but of a man she'd never met, one of the unknown ones. No name, no ID, just a face recovered from a drone still. The photo was blurry, distorted slightly by motion and the angle, but his expression was clear: surprise and fear. The investigators believed it had been taken moments before his disappearance. Some part of Lily had memorized that face, the same way she'd memorized every step of the trail. She sat by the tree her father used to rest beneath, steam rising from her cup, and studied the woods. So still now, so innocent, as if it had never held a single secret. She didn't cry anymore when she came here. Grief had shifted into something else. Not peace. Peace was too final. But clarity. A hard-earned understanding that not all stories made sense, and that some endings weren't really endings at all, just transitions. A hand on the shoulder, a deep breath in the cold. That day, she wasn't alone for long. Sheriff Eli Parks arrived an hour later, dressed in plain clothes, a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded and sat down beside her on the fallen log. They shared the tea. He brought a small flask of something stronger, and she didn't object when he poured a little into her cup. "Anniversary," he said finally. She nodded. "Seems quieter this year." "It's the snow," she said, "muffles everything." He sipped. "You ever wonder what he was thinking, that last moment?" "All the time." "What do you think it was?" She watched the branches shift above them. "I think he saw something he couldn't explain, something that made no sense, and I think he followed it." "You don't think he was taken?" "No," she said softly. "Not then. I think he went willingly, but not because he trusted the man, because he wanted to help." Eli looked at her, surprised. She shrugged. He was that kind of person. If someone had looked lost or confused or hurt, he wouldn't have walked away. And that's what Gerald used. She nodded. "Exactly." They sat in silence again. The woods whispered around them, the kind of winter hush that made every sound sacred. Birds in the distance, a rabbit rustling in the underbrush. The world continuing, indifferent to memory. Eli broke the stillness. "We're closing the case officially. Paperwork came through this morning. DOJ and FBI signed off. All the leads dried up." Lily expected the grief, the ache in her stomach, but instead, she felt something else. A strange, quiet relief, like a door slowly closing behind her. "It doesn't mean we stop remembering," she said. "Of course not. It just means we stop hoping." He looked at her sharply. "You think that's what this was? Hope?" She smiled faintly. "No, but it's what we held on to anyway." Eli pulled something from his coat pocket, a small audio recorder. He placed it gently in her hand. "What is this?" "Gerald's last confession. From hospice. He knew he was dying. Didn't think anyone would listen, but he wanted it on record." She turned the recorder over slowly. "I haven't listened to it," Eli said. "Didn't want to, but you can if you want." Lily stared at it for a long time, then put it in her pocket. That night, back home, she sat by the fireplace with Finley curled at her feet. The recorder sat on the table beside her tea. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in implication. She picked it up, pressed play. His voice was weaker now, gravelly, drawn out like someone talking through syrup. "They never saw me coming," he said. She froze, not because I was clever, but because they didn't think monsters wore flannel, or smiled, or asked how your day was going. He coughed. People let you close when you seem harmless, especially dog people. They trust other dog people. A pause. The first one. He asked for help. That was the trick. I helped him. Then I kept him. Then it got easier. The confession was long, almost 40 minutes. He named names, places, dates. Not all matched any missing persons reports. Some had never been filed. Some had been dismissed. All of them, now, locked in this voice that would never speak again. When it ended, Lily sat still for nearly 10 minutes. Then she stood, walked to the garage, and placed the recorder in the same box that held her father's leash and collar. A quiet museum of what had been lost and what had finally, after all these years, been found. At the next town meeting, she spoke publicly for the first time in over a year. She told no one the details. Only that monsters existed, that they didn't come from darkness. They came from invitation. And that sometimes, finding the truth was the beginning of something else. Not healing, not justice, but understanding. And that would have to be enough. The museum wasn't really a museum, just a room at the local library converted to house photographs, case files, old maps, and an interactive timeline that traced the investigation from the day of the disappearance to the drone discovery and the final confession. But it was enough to draw people in, locals mostly, some from out of town. A few who'd known the other victims by different names, or not at all, but who recognized something in the quiet grief that hung in the air. Lily volunteered there once a week, Saturdays. She didn't speak often, just guided people through the timeline when they asked. Watched them as they stood in front of the glass case where her father's red leash lay, coiled like a sleeping snake. Some cried. Some stood in silence for long stretches, absorbing the weight of what had happened. One woman came every week, never spoke, just stood by, the exhibit of aerial drone footage that showed the flicker of a man caught mid-stride before he vanished behind the brush. She wore a blue scarf, always the same one. Lily never asked who she was, didn't need to. People grieved in different ways, and Lily had learned how to recognize the language of grief without hearing a word. That Saturday, just after closing, she stayed behind to lock up. It had snowed again. Soft drifts clung to the corners of the library windows, diffusing the light into a gentle glow. As she turned off the display screens, her phone buzzed. A message from Eli. Can you meet me? Found something. Not sure what it means. She drove to the station, her headlights slicing through the early evening fog. Eli was waiting in his office, a file spread across his desk. He looked tired, older than last time she'd seen him. Another body? She asked. He shook his head. No, but a connection. He handed her the report. A man, 56 years old, had died in a town 3 counties over. No next of kin. Found in his trailer 2 weeks after a presumed overdose. The cause of death wasn't what stood out. It was what was found on his property. Maps. Photos. Journals. Dozens of entries, all obsessively focused on a man referred to only as descriptions of movements, patterns, questions about his past, about the others. The writer's tone was paranoid, rambling. But buried in the entries were coordinates. And those coordinates, Eli explained, pointed to locations that hadn't been part of the original search radius around the disappearance site. This man, Eli said, tapping the report, he worked in private security during the 80s. Worked for a hunting outfitter in the same region back when Gerald started buying parcels of land. There's a picture of the two of them. Same bar, same weekend, same year. So they knew each other. At some point, yes. And the coordinates? Most are old game trails, but one caught my eye. It's on private land, technically outside the jurisdiction of the original investigation. A stretch of forest Gerald owned through a shell company. Lily understood before he finished. You think there's more? I think he used that area too. And I think there may be more evidence there. Maybe even more victims. She looked at the map. The trail was remote, hard to access even by ATV. I want to check it out, she said. You don't have to. I do, she said, her voice calm. I need to. They left at dawn the next morning. Eli, Lily, and a young park officer named Joel. They took 2 snowmobiles as far as the terrain would allow, then hiked the remaining 2 miles through untouched forest. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made every footstep sound like a drumbeat. The coordinates led them to a clearing. Nothing there at first, just snow and trees and silence. Until Joel noticed the edge of something metal, just peeking from beneath a collapsed tree. It took them an hour to dig it out of a weatherproof container, sealed tight. Inside were documents. Dozens of them. IDs, receipts, handwritten notes. Some were faded, some still legible. Most referenced the same initials, H. Why keep this? Joel asked. Why bury it? Eli didn't answer immediately. He turned over one of the IDs. A face stared back smiling, unaware. Beneath it, a name that had never appeared in any missing persons database. Insurance, Eli finally said. Or maybe memory. Maybe both. Lily stared at the documents, a cold rising in her gut that had nothing to do with the snow. He documented everything, she said, even the ones no one missed. They took the container back to the station. Forensics would comb through every inch, try to match every photo to a name, try to bring answers to families who had stopped asking questions years ago. But for Lily, the clearing had changed something. Not the grief. Not even the closure. But the understanding that her father hadn't been alone, that others had walked the same path, trusted the same stranger, disappeared into the same silence. And that maybe, just maybe, they could be found now. That night, she walked Finley through the same trail her father had loved. Snow still fell, a quiet blanket over the world. Finley paused, ears perked, tail stiff, then relaxed again. There's nothing there. Just shadows. Just memory. She looked up at the stars. They seemed closer now, brighter. I miss you, she said aloud. And somewhere, in the hush between heartbeats, it felt like someone heard her. The evidence found in the buried container would take weeks to catalog, months to fully understand. Each item raised questions that no one could answer. Not definitively, not yet. But the shape of the truth was beginning to emerge, not as a clean confession or a neatly wrapped case file, but as a series of echoes left in the wake of lives interrupted. The list of victims grew. Some were confirmed missing persons. Others had never been reported. Drifters, runaways, seasonal workers whose names hadn't passed through official channels. But they existed. In photos, in fragments of clothing, in initials scrawled beside coordinates on torn notebook pages. They had names once, families, histories. And the man who had taken them had known that. It wasn't random. It was curated. A pattern hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy, concealed by land ownership and community status, and a carefully constructed persona that allowed him to operate unnoticed for years. Eli called it an ecosystem of silence. No one asked questions about a man who offered help, who sponsored youth hunting programs, who lent his cabin to rangers when weather turned bad. And when someone disappeared, the wilderness provided convenient blame. Animals, falls, accidents, nature's cruelty, not human design. The media latched onto the story once the number of presumed victims crossed into double digits. Headlines ranged from sensational to solemn. Documentaries were already being pitched. Interview requests flooded the sheriff's office, but Eli kept the investigation sealed as long as possible. Out of respect, out of necessity. Lily stayed out of the spotlight. She declined interviews, avoided cameras. She wasn't interested in attention. She wanted answers. And Benjamin provided the first real one. He spoke 2 weeks after the recovery. A single sentence, quiet, hoarse, but clear. He promised to let me go. The words haunted Lily, not because they were frightening, but because they were familiar. Her father had always said that trust was a dangerous gift, easy to give, impossible to reclaim. Benjamin had trusted a man who fed him lies between stale food and locked doors. He had believed that compliance might earn freedom, that patience might be rewarded. Instead, it had kept him in the dark for 3 years. Still, each day brought a little more light. Benjamin spoke more often now. Short phrases, memories. He asked about his dog, about Miles. He hadn't remembered what happened after the bunkhouse, and Lily made the decision to tell him only what he asked for. One night, while she was helping him with a puzzle, something the therapist said would rebuild fine motor skills, he looked up and asked, "Was it October when I left?" "Yes," she said softly. "October 3rd. "I thought it was still October," he whispered. He hadn't known. Time had passed. Not fully. He'd felt it. Of course, seasonal changes in temperature, rhythms of light and dark, but his internal clock had stopped somewhere near that last climb. That final step onto a trail he'd never meant to take. The realization broke something in Lily. Not her resolve, but the idea that justice could truly fix anything. Justice couldn't give him those years back. Couldn't give Miles back. Couldn't undo the way the world had kept turning without him, unnoticed. But it could prevent it from happening again. Eli began a cold case task force, using the new information from the container. They worked backwards, rechecking old missing person reports, cross-referencing names with known properties and travel logs. The trail was faint, but there were breadcrumbs. Enough to reopen 2 other cases previously ruled accidental. One involving a young man found drowned in a lake near another of Gerald's shell properties. Another whose remains were found at the base of a ravine, assumed to be a climbing accident. Both men had connections to the region. Both had worked temporary jobs during hunting season. Both had met Gerald at least once, according to newly surfaced witness accounts. None of this was in time to save them. But it was in time to rewrite the record, to pull their names from the margins and place them in the center of a truth that had taken too long to surface. Benjamin began keeping a journal again, not about climbing, not yet, but about food, about memories, about things he remembered loving before everything changed. His therapist said it was a good sign. He never wrote about the bunker. Not directly. But sometimes, Lily would catch him staring out the window for long stretches, and she knew his mind was still trapped in concrete somewhere, still wrapped in chains that no bolt cutter could remove. The hospital released him after 3 months. He moved into a recovery center near the base of the mountain, close to nature, but safe, structured. Slowly, he began joining group sessions, talking to others, even hiking short trails with a counselor, always during daylight, always with another person nearby. He never asked to go alone. Lily visited every weekend. Sometimes they played cards. Sometimes they said nothing at all, just sat in silence, like siblings do, when words are too small for what they've lived through. One afternoon, she brought Finley. The dog was older now, slower, but his ears perked the moment he saw Benjamin, and he let out a soft whine. Benjamin didn't reach for him, just smiled faintly and said, "Good boy." And for Lily, that was enough. The investigation continued. Slowly, methodically, a team of anthropologists was called in to survey Gerald's remaining properties. Ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs. No one wanted to admit what they were really searching for, but they all knew. One morning, Lily received a package. No return address. Inside was a camera, trail cam model, same brand Benjamin had once used. She checked the files. Only one video. It was grainy, recorded at night. A figure moved through the trees too far to identify. Then, a glint of light. A face turned briefly toward the lens. Her father, not the way he looked in photos, not the clean-shaven man with the bright laugh. This version was weary, thin, but alive. He walked into frame, then out. It was time-stamped exactly 6 months before the drone footage was taken. He had survived longer than anyone thought. She watched the clip a dozen times. It didn't change anything, but it changed everything. The video of her father lingered in Lily's thoughts like an echo, unresolved, insistent. She watched it again at night when she couldn't sleep, her mind looping questions she knew had no answers. Had he been trying to find help? Had he been watching from the tree line when search parties passed, unknowingly beneath his perch? Had he left that camera himself, hoping someone would find it? Or had someone else planted it, a trail marker for a story left unfinished? The investigation remained open, but the focus was shifting. Gerald was dead. His secrets were scattered across counties, across years. What remained were patterns and bones, and the memories of those who had vanished without goodbyes. Closure, if it ever came, would not be found in courtrooms or news headlines. It would be found in the quiet acknowledgments between survivors, in remembering names, in reclaiming stories. Benjamin spoke more freely now. He talked about the early days in the bunker, the confusion, the drugs, the way time bled into itself. He didn't cry when he mentioned Miles, but Lily could feel the grief threaded through every sentence like a current. He described the moment he realized he wouldn't be leaving, how Gerald's tone shifted, how the promises dissolved. But he also remembered the sky. He said, on clear nights, when Gerald allowed him out under supervision, he would stare at the stars and imagine a rescue that never came. I used to think I'd see a helicopter, he said once. Just a light, or a sound. Something to remind me the world still existed. Lily nodded. You were never forgotten. I thought I was, he said, voice barely audible. That's the worst part. Not the pain, not even the fear. It was thinking no one was looking anymore. She squeezed his hand. I never stopped. They sat in the afternoon light, filtering through pine trees, the shadows soft and gold. Somewhere in the trees, a squirrel chattered. Life went on, imperfect, unhealed, but undeniably alive. Eli came by that same afternoon. He looked older than she remembered, worn thin by the weight of what he'd uncovered. He handed her a small envelope. Inside were scanned pages. Notes from a second container found beneath the roots of a fallen tree near the original site. They weren't all from Gerald, he said. Lily frowned. What do you mean? Some of the entries. They were written by another man, someone who referred to Gerald in the third person. They talk about watching the process, about helping, cleaning up. Lily's stomach turned. You think he had an accomplice? We do now, possibly more than one. Someone had access to the properties, knew the terrain, knew how to stay invisible. Who? Eli hesitated. We're working on that. We've narrowed it to 3 former employees. 2 are accounted for. 1 isn't. Let me guess, she said. Lived alone, no family, no social media. Eli nodded grimly. Ghost. The envelope contained a map. Markings extended beyond Gerald's known properties into neighboring counties, places no one had searched. You're not stopping, Lily said, a statement more than a question. Eli looked out at the tree line. I can't. The next morning, Lily visited the county archive. The woman at the desk barely looked up when Lily requested access to local employment records. But after an hour of searching, she found something strange. A name, Mason K. Grady. Employed as a seasonal hand at a neighboring ranch owned by a cousin of Gerald's. Dates matched the early disappearances, but the record was flagged as closed, with no forwarding address. Lily wrote it down anyway. Something in the name bothered her. She drove home and pulled up the original missing person list from the sheriff's website, scrolled slowly. When she saw it, her chest went still. Grady. Not Mason, but another, Brandon Grady, missing 6 years earlier from a trailhead, 30 miles west. No one had ever connected the names. She called Eli. By nightfall, a search warrant was in motion for a small trailer on an overgrown property north of the state line. The name on the deed had been changed twice, most recently to a holding company with no listed owner. But the mailboxes told the real story. Inside the trailer, they found photographs, journals, coordinates, everything cataloged, everything numbered. But no sign of Mason. He was gone. Lily stood in the doorway of that trailer, looking at the pinned maps on the wall. Red threads connected counties, rivers, elevation marks. It was a network, a web. She turned to Eli. This wasn't just him. It never was. Eli's expression hardened. We're just beginning. The trailer was impounded. The media caught wind. New headlines emerged. The Collector's Apprentice, one read. Another, The Disciples of a Predator. Lily hated the names. They gave too much drama, too much myth. These men weren't legends. They were cowards, shadows pretending to be storms. But she understood the public's need for narrative, for good versus evil, for heroes and villains. They needed to believe monsters were rare, because the alternative was harder to face, that monsters were mundane, that they mowed their lawns, paid their taxes, volunteered at food drives, that they wore kindness like a mask. She returned to Benjamin's side and didn't mention the new discovery. Not yet. Not until he was ready. He deserved peace, not another wave of fear. That night, she sat on her porch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Finley lay beside her, his breathing slow and rhythmic. Above them, stars blinked into view one by one. The same stars Benjamin had watched from behind a chain. Lily didn't believe in signs, but she believed in persistence. In the dog who had kept barking when no one listened. In the brother who had survived. In the truth that would not stay buried. When her phone buzzed, it was a message from Eli. Just one sentence. We found another container. She didn't respond. Just closed her eyes and let the night hold her. The container was half buried beneath the roots of a cedar tree, found during a wildlife survey. Not a search team, not law enforcement. Just a Forest Service ranger named Elise who noticed an odd mound of disturbed earth and a broken vine. The door was rusted shut. It took a bolt cutter and a crowbar to pry it open. Inside was no body, no prisoner, just notebooks. 3 of them, leather-bound and water-damaged but intact, dated sequentially, each filled with neat, precise handwriting. Not Gerald's. Eli recognized the signature immediately. Mason K. Grady, the apprentice, the witness, the keeper of the rituals. Each entry was a window into something colder than Gerald's madness, because it lacked delusion. Mason's writings didn't attempt to justify. They documented. The first page simply read, "Observation begins." Lily was at the hospital when Eli brought the notebooks. Benjamin was asleep, thin but more himself each day. His therapist had introduced painting into his recovery, and now his room was lined with pieces of abstract color, violent reds, soothing blues, frantic strokes, memories translated into shape and shade. Eli laid the notebooks on the table between them. "We need your help," he said. Lily hesitated before opening the first one. She had promised herself she would stop, that she'd done her part, but there was no peace in ignorance, only temporary numbness. She flipped the cover. Inside was a list. Coordinates, dates, weather conditions. Then sketches, not of people, of terrain, of shelters, traps. One had a note, "Design approved by G. Will modify for higher concealment." Another page, a crude map with trails marked in red, each one labeled with initials. One of them, B.W. Benjamin Wilder. Her throat tightened. Later pages moved into reflection. Mason began describing himself as a silent lens, watching Gerald's interactions with various young men, most of whom he never saw again. He referred to Gerald as the collector. His role, he believed, was to preserve the methodology for future applications. Lily closed the book. They were building something, she said, not just acting on impulse. This was a ritual, a pattern, practice. Eli nodded. And there are still gaps, areas unsearched, places he marked with nothing but a symbol. A symbol? He showed her, a single inked triangle with a dot in the center. No legend, no explanation. It appeared 14 times across the 3 books. Lily stared at it, something old and cold settling in her chest. "It's not over," she said. "No," Eli agreed, "but we're not alone anymore." The media storm intensified in the following weeks. A national task force was formed. The FBI opened a victim identification unit dedicated to the Grady G. Wilder case. More survivors came forward. 2 confirmed having interacted with Gerald and Mason. Both had been offered work. Both had declined. One remembered being followed afterward for days. It was a pattern repeating across rural America: isolated ranches, forgotten trails, missing hikers misclassified as animal attacks or accidental falls. Now, the lens had widened, and under that scrutiny, things began to surface. Bones, backpacks, cell phones deep in plastic containers. Lily became a reluctant symbol, grieving sister turned advocate. She gave interviews, spoke before panels, created an organization to track rural disappearances with previously ignored links. She did it all without fanfare, her voice calm, her words precise. She didn't speak for Benjamin. He had his own voice now. He gave one interview, just one, a carefully orchestrated conversation with a trauma-informed journalist. He talked about the forest, the silence, the way Gerald would narrate their life as if it were a partnership. He called me his anchor, Benjamin said I grounded his darkness. The interviewer had asked, "Did you ever believe him?" There was a long pause. Not at first, not at all, but time. Time wears down what you think is real. Eventually, you believe anything that makes the day shorter. The video went viral. Not for drama, for honesty, for the soft, broken truth in his voice. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was simply exhausted, but free. Lily didn't cry until days later when she rewatched it in her kitchen with the lights off and Finley asleep at her feet. Benjamin had smiled, just once, a small fractured thing, but it was real. That was enough. Spring came early the following year. The trees bloomed pink and white in the foothills. A memorial was held in the glade where Benjamin had been rescued. They planted 17 trees, one for each confirmed victim. No plaques, no names, just roots and growth and a promise. Never again. Lily stayed after the crowd left, running her fingers over the bark of the saplings. The wind moved softly through the clearing, the trees whispering to each other. She didn't believe in closure, but she believed in change. And the world, at least for a moment, felt like it might listen. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A text from Eli. "We found another one. North Dakota." Her jaw clenched, not from surprise, but from certainty. She pocketed the phone and walked into the trees. The story wasn't over, but neither was she. And that, at last, was enough. If stories like this matter to you, uncovering the truth, honoring the lost, and seeking justice resonates, subscribe, because there are more voices to be found, more stories to bring into the light. And we're just getting started.